you don't need to take my word for it, but ESPN has now told us who the most important player in the Big 12 is. And look, I think it'll be polarizing. I think a bunch of you will wholeheartedly disagree on this one. All right. And in fact, I disagree on this one based on the fact that I already did a video about the most important player in the Big 12. And the guy that I picked didn't even make the list here. All right. So let me set the stage for you. Bill Connelly at ESPN, if you're not familiar, he's more of a numbers guy. I really respect his work. I think he does a very good job. He's got the S&P Plus, which has become a very popular model. A lot of these guys have their own models, statistical models in college football. He's got a great Big 12 preview up. I guess, especially if you're a K-State fan, it was very high on K-State. But he's a big numbers guy. And he released an article this week that seemingly a little less rooted specifically in numbers, because the list was just, hey, here are the 40 most important players in college football. There's a ton of quarterbacks, especially in the Big 12, as you might imagine. I mean, I think the Big 12 is the best quarterback league in the country. I don't know that anybody is really fighting that. So you're going to get a lot of quarterbacks in the Big 12. Before we get to most important player of the Big 12, if you really want to be mad here, and I know I said I just respect Bill Connelly's work, but he's talking about the treatment. He does work for ESPN. Who just said ESPN? It was Bracket Cat, right? Just said ESPN's not going to be the best promotion for your conference. Well, 32 players went before we got to the Big 12. Maybe it was at 32. I think the number one player in the Big 12 was at 32. So there were 31 players before we got to a Big 12 player. Big 12's most important player is 32nd most important in the country. Send your angry emails and tweets accordingly. Sorry, Bill. Then the Big 12 gets its own category. Some of this is kind of the way he divided it. He was doing these as specific categories, but the Big 12 got its own category. All right, who's the most important player in the Big 12? Well, three of the quarterbacks that were mentioned were Josh Hoover, Sam Leavitt, and Sawyer Robertson, and I think everybody understands why they are very important. I think most would list them on a top 5, maybe 6, 7. I think they should make anybody's top 5 in terms of most important players in the Big 12. But it was not my most important player, and it was not the one Bill Connelly selected either. Okay, so Bill Connelly picked Avery Johnson, K-State quarterback Avery Johnson, as the most important player in the Big 12. I feel like this is a polarizing one, and I'm just judging this. I know that it's dangerous to do that, but I'm judging this based on social media reaction that I've seen. It does feel like there is a growing sentiment from some Big 12 fans out there like, hey, man, when we talk about quarterbacks that can really sling it and play, like obviously I saw Sam Leavitt do it last year to Texas in the college football playoff. And even if you're going to say that was mostly Cam Scadaboo, I mean, I saw him do it to get to the Big 12 championship game, win a Big 12 championship, dominate that game. Like, I saw that guy do it at a high level. Sawyer Robertson was playing with his hair on fire last year, had a statistically dominant season. So did Josh Hoover. Like, I've seen that guy sling it all over the yard. Avery Johnson was very inconsistent. I have seen some that think Avery Johnson is quite overrated just because the hype has not yet matched the production. Now, my 2 comments on that would be, one, I mean, it's fair to a degree for sure. He has gotten a bunch of hype because of his recruiting pedigree, because of how tantalizing the talent is. Like, you can just see the level of athlete he is, and you think, wow, there is a world of potential with that. But he needs to be way more consistent. I mean, no doubt. Ask any K-State fan, dude. You're going to get that sort of response. It was a very frustrating year last year, starting 7-1, finishing 8-4, losing the game at Houston. I mean, the last month of the season, Avery Johnson was not very good. I think a little bit banged up, but not very good, especially throwing the ball. And he's going to have to take major strides there if he will even approach being the most important player in the conference, for sure. And so I would agree that, like, those guys are much more proven. They're definitely better passers of the football. But this is all about potential. And K-State, I think, has a ton of variance in terms of ceiling to floor this year and what the team could be. And so much of that is going to ride on what Avery Johnson is. So much of that is going to ride on whether or not he takes big steps and he becomes the type of player that everybody sees with the potential. So it can get annoying hearing that P word, potential, but that's definitely what it's about, folks. It's about potential here. And so the comment that stuck with me from Bill Connelly's write-up was that he said K-State has a ceiling higher than 10 wins if Avery Johnson really is as good as he can be this year. So I think that's kind of his idea there. When he talks about most important players in the league, if you think K-State has like a 6-6 floor and like an 11-1 ceiling, which I think is fair to say, then Avery Johnson becomes a really important player because there's such a wide variance in the outcome. Now, if you ask me, who's your most important player in the Big 12, John? This is a very appropriate one to tie it all in with today, what we opened the show talking about. I think the most important player in the Big 12 is Behren Morton, because Texas Tech is going to have so much talent around him. And I still have my doubts about him being an upper echelon Big 12 quarterback and being good enough to tie that all together to be. And we're talking here, I'm not talking about, Tech maybe being like 9-3. I'm talking about Tech being like a 10 or 11 win team, winning the Big 12, going to the playoff, really making some noise, upsetting the apple cart, getting the SEC more shook than they already are now, watching all of Texas Tech's recruiting wins. And because like that potential is there, if Texas Tech does deliver on all the promise of this year, that's why I would argue, if we're talking about like ceilings, that's a huge ceiling, not just for Tech, but for the conference. I don't think K-State's season will have as much bearing on the conference unless you want to say, hey, Avery Johnson's good enough that they could go out and win a playoff game or two, and that would really help the league. All right. I think Tech has a better shot at doing that just because of the sheer talent on their roster. I don't think Tech necessarily has a better shot of fulfilling their full potential, but I think if they got there, they'd be a little bit more well-suited because of how big and physical they are up front. So because of that, like Behren Morton would be number one on my list. He just made the others category for Bill Connelly, so he was at least in there, but he was not one of the guys that made the official list of the top 40 most important. Look, I can listen to arguments for any of those guys. I mean, Baylor, I have said, is arguably the most important team in the Big 12 because of that schedule that they have with Auburn and SMU in the non-con. If they win those two games, that would be a huge lift for the Big 12, particularly the Auburn game. So if you want to say that, fair enough. I will listen to that argument. I would still say that Tech's potential when you get to the playoff, when it matters more than it should in the sport in terms of the perception and how people look at the league, I think that is still higher there. Josh Hoover, kind of the same deal. He'll get a crack at SMU too. They've got a tough schedule, but look, if TCU made a championship game in 2022, it was not that long ago. I can listen to that argument. I just think it's when we talk about variance in terms of one team's success and variance in terms of what could change for the league at large as a result of one team's season, Behren Morton and Avery Johnson are a little bit higher up the list for me. As I think through all these devil's advocate scenarios, like if you want to say, hey, I think Sawyer Robertson's the best shot of any of those guys to win the Heisman, hey, I will listen to that. And that can then be very significant to the Big 12. I would still slightly disagree. Even if that were the case, I would still slightly disagree with how important that could be to the conference relative to Behren Morton, but I get it. I get the point that you're making. Okay, let's get to some super chats before I get out of here. We've got a couple left. Bronco says the Utah Lobos QB sucks. All right, BYU fan, I'm guessing there, not a Devin Dampier fan. Devin Dampier did not get a mention there. You could look. I'll listen to if you want to say Devin Dampier, most important. Utah could turn this thing right around. Devin Dampier, I think, will play a massive role. We've seen how much of an impact does quarterback health and like quarterback play in general have on Utah seasons. We've seen it play out in the last 4 years. They're either a 500 to below 500 team or they're going to the Rose Bowl based on what they get at quarterback. Starter 179. How does he look in camp? Starter 179. If you're still in the chat, let me know when this was. I guess that was probably Avery. I'm sure that was Avery now that I think about it. Yeah, I mean, look, I've heard good things about Avery Johnson, but the thing is, this is the time of year where when do you hear bad things? Very rarely do you hear bad things about how a player is performing in camp. You might hear bad things about injuries, like guys being hurt, which K-State has definitely dealt with some of that, some health situations. But you don't really hear someone saying like, man, yeah, I don't know, dude, QB1 just not playing very well in practice. So I'm just saying that while I've heard very good things and everybody says all the right things about him for sure, it's hard to put too much stock into that with anybody. And that's not just an Avery Johnson specific thing. I would say that for anybody. I mean, I can tell you that Chris Kleiman says Avery Johnson is faster this year. He was one of 4 players on the team that broke 23 miles an hour, which is great. That's very encouraging. I can tell you Avery Johnson has talked about he put too much pressure on himself last year to try and be a straight up pocket passer, that he like really wanted to prove that. And he probably should try to use his legs a little bit more, which I think most K-State fans would agree with. So there's a couple nuggets on Avery Johnson, but I appreciate you, Starter 179. Thank you for being here. Akadon, Morton at Tech has to be most important because of portal spend, expectations, and past injuries. Past injuries definitely factor into that too. Yeah, when you're talking about just like what can happen to Tech's season based on his health or not, that's obviously played a major role in the story of his career so far. And you hate to it's not like he can control a ton of that, but I think, like it or not, that is definitely a piece of the story. So yeah, I'm glad that you agree with me on that. I'm with you. The portal spend, like the investment that has been made in Texas Tech football, and you play the most important position at Texas Tech. And here's another angle on it, Akadon, as I'm thinking about it. Texas Tech, with that level of money, like they could have gone out and tried to spend big in the portal for a different quarterback. If Joey McGuire and James Blanchard felt like, hey, we need to upgrade at quarterback, they could have absolutely gone out and spent that money to do it. They spent that money plenty of other places, but they deemed, hey, Baron Morton's our guy. He's good enough. So we're not going to go spend that money to get like Nico Iamaleava or somebody like that. That's a lot of trust that they've put in him based on that. And that puts some extra importance on your shoulders too. So just a thought there, but appreciate it. I am with you on that. Thank you for your support of the channel.